We have a saying here that anything north of Macon is the Metro Atlanta area, and anything south of Atlanta is South Georgia. But unrealistic geography aside, North Georgia and South Georgia are virtually two different worlds. As someone who grew up in South Georgia and has now been a resident of North Georgia area for the last 8 years, I can tell you that firsthand. Hi, I'm Sarah Maslowski with KeyPoint Homes Group. We are a real estate team specializing in helping people relocate from all over the country right here to Georgia. Our team is based out of North Georgia, more specifically Buford, and our office is right on the Hall County-Gwinnett line. We're just about 40 miles north of Atlanta and a few minutes shy of Lake Lanier. That is a massive man-made lake that sprawls throughout 5 different counties here in Georgia. And our team specializes in areas all across the Northeast Metro Atlanta area. We cover a pretty big span. We do, however, get lots of phone calls from people who are interested in towns all across the state, especially in South Georgia. One of the best things about reaching out to us is that we are able to put you in contact with one of our great partner agents to make sure that your needs are being served at a really high level. So if you're looking for a home in South Georgia, Middle Georgia, or North Georgia, we have the connections to help you find a really great agent. So we mostly talk about North Georgia here on our channel, but let's talk about South Georgia. What are those differences and why would you want to consider maybe living in South Georgia, and what are the pros and cons that you should consider? So let's start with a brief geography lesson. That one that I told you at the beginning of the video, that's completely false. Geography aside, that's what Metro Atlanta people think the North Georgia and South Georgia is. All right, so Georgia has 5 regions. The top 3 regions encompass the mountains, then you have the Piedmont region, which is where we are located, and then at the bottom of the state you have the coastal plain region. So looking at this map, you'll see that we have a fall line that essentially splits the state in half. Augusta, a town in Middle Georgia, although that's funny to me that technically it's Middle Georgia, but I don't really consider it Middle Georgia. We get a lot of questions about Augusta, and it sits right there on this fall line. Essentially, the state just kind of drops down and flattens out after Augusta. So back when Georgia was established, it made trade easier because of the rivers and streams. And so this is why when you're searching for a home in present day, let's say Augusta, you're going to find much older homes, many of which were built in the 1800s and early 1900s, like this historical home built in 1760. So the reason people originally moved to South Georgia was because the land below the fall line was flat and the soil was better, which was great for growing crops. It was very different than North Georgia, where crops were so much more difficult to grow because you had mountains and the good old Georgia red clay. Now I say that you're still going to have red clay down in South Georgia as well. Now this fall line that I'm talking about, it's what we commonly refer to as the gnat line. So if you remember in this previous video, we talked about gnats, the gnat line of Georgia, and that is because gnats thrive off of wet, sandy soils, and that is the perfect conditions in the coastal region area. Now, let me tell you, having grown up in Valdosta, Georgia, the gnats are terrible, and I do not miss this at all. Not at all. And so not only do you have gnats, but we lived over in Brunswick area near St. Simon's, and over there you have these things called sand gnats, and they bite you. They're like invisible, no see-ums, and all of a sudden you're just like getting eaten alive, and it's because of these terrible gnats. That was a rude awakening for us whenever we moved there. Perfect, great weather to sit outside, and then you sit outside, and then all of a sudden you start getting eaten alive, and you're like, what are these things? Sand gnats. All right, so despite the fact that areas like Savannah and Augusta, which were established much earlier in history, the Piedmont region is the highest populated region in Georgia. That's where you can kind of consider the North Metro Atlanta area. And this is mainly due to the fact that Atlanta is in it. The reason that so many people are drawn to this region is because as a whole there is so much more growth and development, which means job opportunities and a chance at a higher income. According to the 2020 U.S. Census, Fulton County, where Atlanta is located, has a median income of $72,000, almost $73,000, and it has over 39,000 employer establishments. That's where you can go to get all those jobs. Now, there were just over 1 million residents in the Atlanta metro, and 54% of these residents have a bachelor's degree in Atlanta or a higher education degree. The employment rate was 64% as well. Now, if we look at Forsyth County, which is where Alpharetta is located, they have a median household income of $113,000, and they have 67% employment rate. And then Gwinnett County has a median household income of $73,000 and a population just shy of 1 million. Now, if we compare that to Richmond County, where Augusta is located, there they have a population of just over 200,000 people with a median household income of $43,000. And they only have 4,000, just a little over 4,000 employer establishments. And when we look at their employment rate, it's only 51%, and only 22% of residents there have a bachelor's degree or higher education. Looking at Chatham County, which is where Savannah is located, they have a population of just under 300,000, so bigger than Augusta, and the median household income there is just shy of 58,000, and they have just over 8,000 employer establishments there with a 59% employment rate. Now, all of this is to say, it's based on the 2020 census. The northern half of the state has a higher population, higher percentage of job opportunities, and higher income levels. So based on these factors, you're going to find that the cost of living is dramatically different between North and South Georgia. Of course, if you are looking at a house on the coast on South Georgia, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. But overall, home prices in North Georgia, specifically the Piedmont region, that Atlanta region, metro Atlanta area, is going to be significantly higher than they are in South Georgia. Now, if you paid attention to houses that I showed earlier, like those that were built in Augusta that were built in the early 1900s, you would have noticed that they were substantially less expensive than the towns I talk about regularly here on our channel. Not just cheaper than towns like Alpharetta or Johns Creek or Suwanee, which you've heard me talk about the high price tag before, but even towns that tend to be a little bit more affordable, like Gainesville and Brazelton and Tequila. Now, as a whole, the northern area on the state on paper is more desirable to live in. Of course, there are reasons why people would prefer to live in South Georgia instead of North Georgia. South Georgia and North Georgia have drastically different feels in many ways, weather-wise, geographically, and the overall vibe, if you will. So in South Georgia, we talked about that land is very flat. I mean flat. And you've also got marshes and swamps that cover a big area that make it hard to inhabit. So the Okefenokee area of South Georgia, there's hardly anything there. And so this is one thing that was surprising to me whenever we moved from South Georgia area to North Georgia, is that in South Georgia, if you drove 15-20 minutes out of town, you were in the sticks. You were amongst the pine trees, you were driving through swampland, you saw nothing. You were lucky if you came across a gas station, and it was like one of those gas stations where you're like, do I really want to stop here, or do I want to risk running out of gas? That is the kind of area that there is down there in South Georgia, and you would drive 30, 45 minutes until you got to the next town. That is so different than here in the Piedmont region, North Georgia, North Metro Atlanta area. You can drive for 2-3 hours and never run out of towns that you're running into. You would never be in the sticks unless you specifically sought out those areas where you wanted to be in the sticks. So it's not uncommon for us here to get in our car and drive what we think is not that far for dinner, 30-45 minutes, but when we lived in Valdosta, we also lived in a tiny town in Douglas, getting in the car and driving 30-45 minutes away for dinner would seem unreal because you're literally driving through the woods to get to some place. And yet I think it feels a lot different because you're surrounded by just people and traffic and things to look at, so it doesn't really feel like you're going out of town to go to dinner. Whereas back in South Georgia, we literally sometimes would go out of town to go to dinner. So another really cool thing about South Georgia is that you have a really great coastline. So you have 100 or so miles that make up Georgia's coastline, and there's 500,000 acres of salt marshes. And of course, you have the beaches at Jekyll, Tybee, and St. Simon's Island as also. And that was a great thing about being in South Georgia, is that we could drive over to the Georgia coast and we could be there in 2-ish hours or so and enjoy that. Or heck, you were even kind of closer to the Gulf Coast, or even a 3-hour drive down to the Gulf Coast of Florida, and you could enjoy those amazing beaches. And so one of the downsides of living up here in this area right now is that if you want to go to a beach, you're looking at a good 5-hour drive, 6 hours if you want to go down to the Gulf Coast and enjoy those great sugar sand beaches. One thing to know about the beaches on the east coast of Georgia, they're brown sand, brown water. It's not very pretty, but it is fun. So one interesting thing, when you compare Georgia's coastline, it's only about 100 miles long, and if you look at Lake Lanier, which we talk about a lot on our channel, you have over 692 miles of coastline around Lake Lanier to enjoy. So in North Georgia, if you wanted to spend a day on the water, you are going to head to the lake, like Lake Lanier or Hartwell or Allatoona. Down south, if you want to spend a day on the water, you're looking at a pond. You're going to go fishing in a pond, or you are going to get in the car and drive to the beach. Now, in the North Georgia area, one of the great things that I love here is that you have the mountains. So you can take advantage of the hiking and wineries, and you also have a little bit of a cooler climate. There's nothing like that down in South Georgia. You have hot, and more hot. One of the things I also noticed and enjoy about being up here in North Georgia is that you have a lot less humidity and you experience way more seasons here. So growing up in Valdosta, we lived for many years in Brunswick as well. If you wanted to have a winter wardrobe, you maybe got to wear your sweater or your coat or your boots that you got maybe a handful of times throughout the winter. And so that's definitely not the case here in the North Metro Atlanta area, North Georgia. You get to wear those things all the time. But it's also not something that you're like freezing your tushy off, right? You really get to experience that winter. And one of the things that I love is that you also get to experience snow flurries, which are always very, very exciting to me. That is not happening ever in South Georgia. I say ever. It did happen one time when I was a child, some freak thing, and I remember that event vividly. It was so exciting. But so while that was like a once-in-a-lifetime experience in South Georgia, and then every single year since we've been here in North Georgia, going on 8 years now, it has snowed one day out of the year, and it's been magical. So another big difference between North Georgia and South Georgia is the shopping. Of course, if you are going to be closer to the Atlanta area or north of Atlanta, you are going to have far more shopping options and amenities, things to do, concerts, events, everything. You're going to find yourself gravitating and going to a lot more things in North Georgia, North Metro Atlanta area, than what there ever is in South Georgia. So I remember growing up in Valdosta. It was a growing town, but it was still kind of small. There's an Air Force base there. We've got a really great college university there. But growing up in Valdosta, we would drive to Tallahassee, Florida, which was an hour away, just to go to Sam's. Yes, the Sam's Club. Like, it was an event, and it was an exciting thing, and I remember getting the samples, and all because Valdosta did not have a Sam's. And it was a front page news whenever Valdosta got a Sam's Club. Even though the town has grown, it's still a relatively small town, and like most South Georgia towns, you're going to have to drive to get to many big box department stores and other mall brands. So homecoming dress shopping, all of those events where you might need a special occasion, something, it was, hey, let's get in the car and let's drive to Tallahassee, or let's drive the 2.5 hours to Jacksonville to go shopping at the big mall, because the only store that they would have at the mall in Valdosta would be like a Belk. So that's a local or southern department store. I don't know what the equivalent would be where you are, but we would have a mall, but it would just be a handful of stores. And it's kind of still that way to this day. So you're going to have some bigger towns in South Georgia. They're going to have big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot and, grocery stores and things like that. But if you really want to go shopping at kind of like those special occasion stores, or like those specialty stores like Sephora or Ulta or things like that, you're probably gonna have to get in the car and drive for a good hour, maybe sometimes 2 hours, to get to the closest town that's gonna have those things. Now, if you don't care about being close to these options and you're thinking, we really only go there once or twice a year, I don't mind getting in the car and driving. You're obviously going to have an overall lower cost of living in these areas that have kind of like less access to amenities, and South Georgia may just be the place for you. Another big difference between South Georgia and North Georgia is the sense of community. So I mentioned that I grew up in Valdosta, and our town had 2 high schools, bigger high schools, but 2. We had the county high school, Lowndes, go Lowndes, and the city high school, Valdosta High School. And sports rivalries are huge and still a very, very big deal. Now, if you'll compare that to where I currently live, which is in Gainesville, which is in Hall County. Now, this county, they have a city high school and they have 10 county high schools. And things are, well, a bit different, right? So the entire town isn't attending the 1 football game in town that night or the 2 football games that are going on. The sense of community in South Georgia is definitely something special, but it's also, it can be kind of limiting. So towns in South Georgia, and again, this is my opinion, it's kind of like where everyone knows everyone, for better or worse. People tend to grow up there, and then they raise their kids there, and then their kids, and you know, everyone knows everyone. And then when you compare that to many towns here in North Georgia or the metro Atlanta area, because it's so densely populated, majority of the people that live here are transplants. Because of all of these amazing job opportunities and because of the metropolitan area, there's a lot of transient people that relocate to the area from other parts of the country where that's just not, that opportunity draw is not happening in South Georgia. And even if you did grow up in the metro Atlanta area, even moving 20 miles away, it kind of puts you in an entirely different demographic, geographic area, unlike, say, South Georgia. So those are the differences between North Georgia and South Georgia. Which one would you consider moving to? And of course, if you're considering any kind of move at all to Georgia, make sure that you give my team a call. We would be happy to put you in touch with the perfect agent to help make your move. And if you have not watched these videos about moving to Georgia, they are an absolute must. You want to make sure that you avoid these mistakes, and these are the things that you need to know before moving to Georgia.